I never planned to tell this story. Not because I'm afraid of it, but because saying it out loud still tastes like rust in my mouth. My brother slept with my wife. And I don't mean that in the careless way people sometimes use betrayal as a metaphor. I mean it literally. The same brother I grew up with, the one who shared my blood, my childhood, and my laughter, laid his head where I was supposed to find peace. That night, something in me shattered so completely that I could hear the sound of it echoing inside my chest for weeks. But another part of me woke up, a colder part, a patient and deliberate part, the kind that learns how to smile while sharpening knives in silence. I was born in Lagos, in a neighborhood that smelled of diesel fumes, sweat, and promise. The houses were too close to each other, the music too loud, and the air too alive to ignore. People there didn't need much to dream. They just needed a reason to wake up and keep moving. My brother, Gabriel, Gabe for short, was my reason for a long time. He was the kind of boy who could make a crowd follow him just by starting to run. His smile had rhythm. He walked into rooms like light spilling through a cracked door, and somehow everything around him seemed to rearrange itself to make space. I admired him, I envied him, and I protected him, even when he didn't deserve it. I was quieter, more cautious, the one who always wanted things to make sense before stepping forward. Gabe used to tease me about that. He'd say, "David, you're the type to check if the sea has permission before swimming in it." He'd laugh, slap my shoulder, and run into trouble while I stayed behind counting the cost. But we were brothers, two halves of one stubborn story. If someone hurt him, I hurt them. If someone mocked me, he was the first to swing. Blood was blood, until it wasn't. We grew up in a small two-room house with a zinc roof that sang every time it rained. When thunder cracked open the night, we'd race each other to the window to watch the sky fight itself. My mother would shout for us to move away before lightning caught our curiosity. My father was a mechanic who smelled of engine oil and iron. He used to say, "Boys, the world is not fair, but if you stand tall enough, you can make it look like it is." He died before he could see how wrong he was about that. By the time I met Lila, I was already tired of small talk and temporary people. She appeared one Saturday at a friend's wedding in Abeokuta. The music was too loud, the food too spicy, and the air heavy with perfume and laughter. She wore yellow, not the pale kind, but the bold golden kind that dares the sun to compete. She laughed like she didn't owe the world an apology, and when she caught me staring, she tilted her head and said, "You look like a man trying to calculate how long he has to stay before it's polite to leave." I told her she was right. She smiled and said, "Then let's both stay long enough to make it worth it." That was how it started. We talked until the DJ packed his things. She told me about her job as a teacher, her dream of opening a school for children who couldn't afford one, her love for jazz and high life. I told her about my work at an architecture firm, how buildings made me believe that humans could shape permanence out of dust. She asked if I believed in fate. I said I believed in timing. She said, "Then this must be both." That night, when she gave me her number, she wrote it on a napkin and folded it twice, like a secret. Lila had a way of turning ordinary things into rituals. She brewed her tea like she was making medicine for the soul. She hummed when she cooked, small melodies that smelled like home. And when she smiled at me, it felt like being chosen, like the world had finally decided to repay me for all the quiet years I'd spent watching other people get what they wanted. We got married in the rainy season, under a sky so gray it looked like it was holding its breath. My mother cried. My friends danced. Gabe gave a toast that made everyone laugh and me almost tear up. He said, "If love is a fire, may these two never run out of wood." I didn't know then that he was already holding the matches. For a while, life was good. Ordinary, in the best way possible. I'd wake to the smell of shea butter and Lila's warmth beside me. We'd eat breakfast together, talk about nothing and everything, and laugh at how serious I looked when I was thinking. On weekends, we'd visit my mother, who'd cook for us and pretend not to notice how often Lila helped her without being asked. My brother would stop by sometimes, bringing jokes and stories and that restless energy that filled the house like wind through curtains. Lila enjoyed his company. Everyone did. He could make anyone feel seen, even when he wasn't really looking. Sometimes I'd find them laughing in the kitchen, their shoulders touching. It didn't bother me then. Why would it? He was my brother. She was my wife. What could go wrong? The first sign was small. It always is. One afternoon, Lila's phone buzzed while she was in the shower. I wasn't the kind of man who checked his wife's messages, but the screen lit up, and I happened to see a name. Gabe. Just Gabe. The message preview said, "I can't stop thinking about last night." My heart skipped. Then reason whispered, "It's probably nothing." My brother and I had gone out the night before. Maybe he was talking about that. I told myself stories so I wouldn't have to ask questions. It's strange how we choose ignorance because it hurts less than curiosity. A few days later, Lila came home wearing a bracelet I'd never seen before. White cowbone beads, polished and smooth, with a small carved heart in the center. "Beautiful," I said. "Where'd you get it?" She smiled, a little too quickly. "From the market. The lady there said it would bring peace." I nodded, but later that week, Gabe came over, and when I offered him water, I noticed the same kind of bracelet on his wrist. "Nice," I said casually. He looked down, smiled. "Oh, this? I got it from a craft seller in Lecky. Thought I'd pick up a few. Gave one to Lila, too. You know, matching vibes." He said it so easily, I almost believed it. Almost. The night it all broke open, the sky was heavy with rain that refused to fall. I came home early because a client canceled a meeting. The house was quiet. Too quiet. On the dining table were 2 half-empty glasses of wine. We didn't drink wine in the afternoon. My chest tightened, but I still called out, "Lila?" No answer. Her bag was on the sofa. Her scarf lay on the armrest. From the bedroom came a muffled sound. I don't know what made me move so slowly toward that door. Maybe part of me already knew. Maybe I wanted to give them a few more seconds of whatever illusion they were living before I ended it. When I opened the door, the world stopped. There are moments that divide your life into before and after. That was mine. Gabe's bare back was bent over the woman who had promised to love me until death. Lila's face turned toward the ceiling as if praying to a god that would not come. My first thought wasn't anger. It was disbelief. I remember noticing small things. The scar on Gabe's shoulder from when we were kids. The way Lila's hair spilled over the pillow. The sound of their breath turning to silence as they saw me. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I just closed the door, walked to the living room, and sat down. Time became elastic. I heard footsteps, whispers, the sound of clothes pulled in a hurry. They came out, faces pale, eyes wide. Gabe tried to speak. I raised a hand and he stopped. "Leave," I said. Just that. Lila started crying, reaching for me. I turned my head away. "Leave," I repeated. My voice didn't even sound like mine. They left. I don't remember how long I sat there afterward. Maybe hours, maybe days. All I know is that when I finally stood up, I wasn't the same man anymore. Something inside me had shifted, and it wasn't going to shift back. For the next few weeks, I moved like a ghost. People spoke, I answered, but I wasn't really there. My mother asked what was wrong, and I told her work stress. Gabe tried to call me. I ignored him. Lila sent messages full of apologies, full of reasons that didn't matter. One night she came to the gate of my apartment, crying, begging me to talk. I stood there, watching her under the streetlight. Her tears looked real. Her voice broke in all the right places. but I had nothing left to give her. "You made your choice," I said. "Now let me make mine." And I closed the gate. For a long time, revenge was just a word I whispered to myself in the dark. I didn't know what form it would take. I only knew that I couldn't move on until he felt what I felt. And then I remembered her, Sade, Gabe's ex, the one woman who had ever managed to break him. She was a photographer, a storm wrapped in calm. I'd met her years ago when Gabe brought her home for dinner. My mother loved her instantly. She had eyes that saw straight through pretense and a smile that could both soothe and sting. When Gabe cheated on her, and he did because he couldn't help himself, she left without a word. He pretended not to care, but I knew better. He never stopped mentioning her name after a few drinks. Sade was different, he'd say, like a confession. I found her living in Abuja now, running a small studio near Jabi Lake. It took me 2 weeks to gather the courage to call. When she answered, her voice was the same, steady, low, controlled. I introduced myself, said I was Gabe's brother. She was silent for a moment, then said, "And what does Gabe's brother want with me?" I hesitated. "Closure," I lied. She laughed softly. "Closure is just revenge wearing perfume." But she told me to come by anyway. When I arrived at her studio, the walls were covered with portraits. Faces caught mid-laughter, eyes caught mid-tear. She looked different, stronger somehow, like she'd learned to use pain as fuel. "So," she said, crossing her arms, "your brother hurt you too?" I nodded. She studied me for a long moment, then said, "And now you want to hurt him back. Let me guess. You think using me will do it." Her words hit hard because they were true. I opened my mouth to deny it, but she waved her hand. "Don't bother. You wear revenge like a cologne. I can smell it from here." Then she smiled, small and dangerous. "But maybe we can help each other." That was the beginning. We didn't plan anything elaborate, just appearances. We'd show up together where Gabe couldn't avoid us. We'd let him see us laugh, touch, lean into each other. We'd let him believe I had found love where he had once been loved. I told myself it wasn't about her, it was about him. But somewhere deep down, I think I already knew that no revenge ever stays clean. The first time Gabe saw us together was at church. Lagos churches are small kingdoms of gossip. Everyone watches everyone. When Sade and I walked in holding hands, heads turned. My mother's eyes widened. Gabe, seated near the front, froze mid-conversation. His smile faltered, his jaw clenched. After the service, he came to us. "Sade," he said, trying for casual but failing. "Long time." She smiled. "Yes, long enough to forget the sound of your excuses." Then she looked at me and said, "David, shall we?" And we walked away, leaving him standing there like a man who just watched his past and his punishment shaking hands. That night he called me. "What's going on with you and Sade?" he demanded. "You know what she means to me." I said, "You should have thought about that before meaning something to my wife." He went silent. "You're doing this to hurt me," he finally said. "No," I replied. "I'm doing this to remind you that pain doesn't vanish just because you look away." I hung up before he could answer. In the weeks that followed, Sade and I became the talk of the town. We went to dinners, family gatherings, anywhere Gabe's shadow might fall. She played her part flawlessly. We laughed at the same time, shared looks that felt real even when they shouldn't. And maybe that was the problem. They started to feel real. When she smiled at me, something in my chest softened. When she touched my hand, I forgot, for a second, that this was all supposed to be a lie. One evening, after a long day pretending to be happy for the sake of revenge, we ended up sitting by the lagoon, watching the city lights tremble on the water. She turned to me and said, "You're quieter tonight." I said, "Maybe I'm running out of reasons to be angry." She looked at me for a while, then said, "Good. Because anger is a bad landlord. It makes you pay rent and still kicks you out." I laughed. Then she added softly, "Just don't mistake healing for weakness." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she was already looking away, her face lit by the reflection of the water. That night when I got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her words, about the way her voice didn't tremble when she said them, and about how maybe, just maybe, this revenge was becoming something else. I started seeing Sade more often, not because the plan required it, but because silence felt heavier when she wasn't around. She had this way of making space without forcing conversation. Some days we'd sit in her studio while she edited photos, the air filled with the soft tapping of her keyboard and the smell of black coffee. I'd read in the corner or watch how sunlight hit her cheekbones, the way her hair caught the light, like a question I didn't have the courage to ask. It wasn't supposed to become that kind of story. But life rarely cares about what's supposed to happen. One afternoon, she asked me to pose for a photograph. "You've been hiding behind that serious face," she said. "Let's see the truth in your eyes." I tried to protest, but she insisted. She positioned me by the window, told me to look straight at the lens. "Now," she said, "think of the exact moment you stopped being yourself." I didn't expect that. But before I could answer, she pressed the shutter. The click sounded like a confession. Later, when she showed me the photo, I barely recognized the man in it. His eyes looked both angry and lost, as if he was halfway between vengeance and surrender. "That's what grief looks like," she said softly. "It's beautiful, in a terrible way." We were still pretending. At least, that's what I told myself. But every pretense has an expiration date. The night we kissed, there were no cameras, no spectators, no need for Gabe to see anything. It happened after a long day, when power had gone out again and the city was humming with generators. She lit a candle, poured us both some wine, and asked if I ever missed who I used to be. I told her I didn't even remember that man anymore. She touched my face and said, "He's still there, David. He's just hiding under all that fire." Then she leaned in and our mouths met like two storms colliding. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't planned. It was survival dressed as tenderness. After that, the lines blurred. We still talked about Gabe, still whispered plans about how to make him feel what he had done to me, but our reasons grew less clear. Sometimes she'd say, "Let's go to your mother's next Sunday," and I'd know it wasn't just about being seen anymore. It was about being together. And that scared me more than anything, because revenge is simple when your heart stays cold. But once warmth creeps in, everything gets complicated. When we showed up at my mother's house, the whole compound buzzed with confusion. My mother looked from me to Sade, from Sade to me, her eyes filling with unspoken questions. Gabe was there too, sitting under the mango tree scrolling through his phone. The moment he looked up, the air tightened. His jaw flexed, his eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. My mother, ever the diplomat, invited us all to eat. During lunch, the silence did most of the talking. Gabe barely touched his food. Sade smiled politely, answering questions about her photography with grace. I played my part, nodding, smiling, pretending this was normal. But inside, I was a volcano pretending to be a hill. After the meal, Gabe pulled me aside. "What's this, David?" he asked, voice trembling with barely contained anger. "You think this will fix what happened? You think sleeping with my ex will make us even?" I looked at him, unflinching. "No," I said. "It won't make us even. It'll just make the math more interesting." His eyes darkened. "You're better than this." I smiled, bitter. "Apparently not." He clenched his fist but didn't swing. He just shook his head. "You're breaking yourself," he said quietly. "Not me." Then he walked away. I wanted to laugh, but the sound died in my throat because a part of me knew he was right. Still, I couldn't stop. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was momentum. Maybe I just didn't know who I'd be if I let go. So when my father's 65th birthday came, I made sure everyone would see what I'd become. It was a big celebration, relatives from all over, food that smelled like memory, music loud enough to hide regrets. Sade wore a red dress that turned heads. I wore a navy agbada and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. We danced, we laughed, we played our parts like professionals. And then, in the middle of the evening, I raised my glass and made an announcement. "Family," I said, voice steady, "life gives us second chances in strange ways. Sade and I have decided to get married." The room erupted in murmurs. My mother's hand flew to her chest. My father froze. Gabe stood near the back, motionless. His face went pale, then flushed. Sade squeezed my hand under the table. Somewhere in the chaos, someone started clapping, and then everyone did, because that's what people do when they don't know what else to do. I smiled through it all, pretending this was triumph. But inside, I felt hollow, like a man who'd built a castle out of ash. That night, after everyone left, my mother came to me. "David," she said softly, "is this love or punishment?" I looked away. "Does it matter?" She sighed. "Yes, because punishment ends, but love doesn't. Be sure which one you're feeding." I didn't answer. I didn't know how. In the weeks that followed, preparations began. Sade moved like someone walking a tightrope. Sometimes she'd look at me with eyes full of something tender, and I'd look away before I drowned in it. We didn't talk about what we were doing anymore. We just did it. The invitations went out. The venue was booked. My mother prayed. My father stayed silent. And Gabe disappeared. No calls, no visits. I told myself that was victory, but it didn't feel like it. One night, a few days before the wedding, I found Sade sitting alone on her balcony, staring at the city lights. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. She didn't turn. "Don't I?" I stepped closer. "It's gone too far." She sighed. "Revenge doesn't have brakes, David. It only stops when you crash." Her words sank deep, but I brushed them aside. "After this, everything will make sense again," I said, more to myself than to her. She looked at me then, her eyes tired but kind. "No, it won't, but maybe you'll stop pretending it can." The wedding day came like a storm you know is coming but still stand under. The morning air was heavy with humidity and expectation. I put on my suit, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized the man staring back. Sade looked radiant, calm, composed, like she'd made peace with whatever was about to happen. My mother cried quietly during the ceremony. My father gave me a look that said nothing and everything. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I half expected Gabe to burst in, shouting, but he didn't. He stood at the back, silent, eyes fixed on the floor. We said our vows. The words tasted like sand in my mouth, for better or worse. I almost laughed. We kissed. People cheered. Cameras flashed, and somewhere deep inside, something broke for the last time. That night, after everyone had gone, Sade and I sat in the small apartment we had rented. The city outside hummed like it always did, indifferent to human drama. She poured us both a drink and said, "We did it." I nodded. She looked at me. "Do you feel better?" I took a long sip before answering. "I feel nothing." She nodded slowly. "That's how emptiness feels at first, like peace." We sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, she took off her earrings, set them on the table, and whispered, "You can't build healing on top of hurt. It always collapses." Days turned into weeks. The world called us newlyweds, but we lived like actors after the curtain had fallen. Lost, exhausted, unsure of who we were without an audience. Sade buried herself in her photography. I buried myself in work. We rarely spoke about Gabe or Lila anymore, but their ghosts lingered, hovering in the corners of every quiet room. One evening, I came home to find Sade sitting on the floor, surrounded by photos. Portraits of strangers, families, lovers. She looked up at me and said, "I've been thinking about mercy." I frowned. "What about it?" She picked up a photo of a woman holding a newborn. Mercy isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about not letting their sins define you. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, realizing that while I had been chasing punishment, she had been chasing freedom. Then came the visit I didn't expect. Gabe showed up at my mother's house while I was there fixing the door. He looked thinner, older, humbled in a way I'd never seen. He didn't wait for pleasantries. "David," he said, "I'm sorry." His voice cracked on the word. "I was stupid. I was selfish. I hurt you in a way I can never undo, but please, don't let this destroy both of us. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to throw the tools in my hand and scream. But instead, I stood there, frozen. You think sorry fixes everything? I asked quietly. No, he said, but it's a start. He looked down, swallowed hard. You married her, didn't you? I nodded. He gave a small, broken laugh. Then I guess we're both ghosts now. And with that, he left. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept replaying in my head. Ghosts. That's what we had become. People haunting our own lives. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed of the zinc roof from our childhood, of rain falling so hard it drowned out everything else. Gabe and I were kids again, laughing, racing to see who could catch the most drops in our palms. For a moment, there was no betrayal, no revenge, just two brothers trying to hold water that would never stay. The next morning, I woke up to find Sade packing. What are you doing? I asked. She didn't stop. Leaving. My chest tightened. Why? She turned to me, tears shining in her eyes. Because you don't need me anymore. Not for revenge, not for love, not for anything. I took a step toward her. That's not true. She shook her head. David, we built this out of anger. It can't survive love. It'll rot under it. She zipped her bag. I cared for you, maybe too much, but I won't let us both drown. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it for a moment, then gently pulled away. Forgive him, she said softly. Not because he deserves it, but because you do. Then she walked out. The silence she left behind was deafening. For the first time since that day in the bedroom, I felt the full weight of everything. The loss, the rage, the emptiness. I realized that every step I'd taken since that moment had been backward. I hadn't been fighting for peace, I'd been fighting to stay angry, because anger was easier than pain. But now even that armor was gone. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was trembling. David, she said, you should come. Lila's here. I froze. Why? Just come. When I arrived, Lila was sitting in the living room, her hands clasped, her eyes swollen. She stood when she saw me. David, she said softly, I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a blow. With whose child? I asked, already terrified of the answer. Yours, she said. I found out a few weeks before everything. I didn't know how to tell you. I stared at her, my mind spinning. My mother stood nearby, silent, watching us both unravel. I didn't say anything. I just walked outside and stood under the mango tree, the same one where Gabe and I used to play. The wind rustled the leaves, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not the angry, restrained kind of tears I'd been holding back. The raw kind. The kind that burn on their way out. Because now, revenge had a cost I hadn't planned for. A child. Innocent, unborn, blameless. My mother came out, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, The devil came through your brother, but he's leaving through you. Don't let him stay. That night, I went home and sat in the dark for hours. Sade's side of the bed was empty. The apartment smelled of her perfume, faint but persistent, like memory refusing to fade. I thought about Gabe, about Lila, about the baby, about how I had tried to play God and ended up losing everything that mattered. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer I hadn't said in years. God, if you're listening, help me be more than what they made me. After that night, I disappeared from everyone for a while. I didn't answer calls, didn't go to work, didn't even open the curtains. The world outside kept moving, but mine stood still. It's strange how pain slows time, stretches it like old elastic until even breathing feels like work. I spent days staring at the ceiling, counting the lines in the plaster like they could spell out what I was supposed to do next. Every sound became a memory. A car horn reminded me of Gabe's laugh. A knock on the door sounded like Lila calling my name. A gust of wind whispered Sade's voice. I was surrounded by ghosts I had built myself. But life, as it always does, refused to stop. One morning my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice was calm but firm. David, I don't care what you think you're running from, you will come home. Today. There was no arguing with her tone. I showered for the first time in days, put on a clean shirt, and drove to the house where I'd grown up. When I got there, she was sitting on the porch, shelling ground nuts like she used to when we were kids. She didn't even look up when she said, "Sit." I sat. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air smelled of dust and wet leaves. Finally, she said, "I raised 2 sons. One lost his way through pride, and the other through pain. Tell me, which one are you?" I wanted to say pain, but the words stuck. She kept shelling, her fingers moving rhythmically. "Your father used to say that when a fire burns too long, it stops giving light and starts eating its own smoke." She looked at me then, her eyes sharp as knives. "Stop feeding your fire, David. Let it die." Her words hit me harder than I expected, because I realized I didn't even know how to stop. That evening, she made me tea like she always did. Ginger and honey, the cure for everything in her world. As I drank, she said softly, "Lila's still pregnant. You can hate her all you want, but that child did nothing to you. He deserves a father, not a ghost." I nodded slowly. She smiled, tired but proud. "Good. Because ghosts can't teach children how to walk." The next day, I went to see Lila. She was living with her sister, her belly round now, her face softer. When she saw me at the door, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "Neither did I replied. We stood there for a while, both unsure of how to begin. Finally, she stepped aside. The apartment smelled of baby oil and boiled yam. On the wall hung a photo of our wedding, us smiling, innocent, unaware of how fragile happiness could be. She noticed me looking at it. "I should have taken it down," she said quietly. "No," I said. "Leave it. It's part of the story." We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about how she had panicked after what happened, how guilt had eaten her alive, about how she didn't expect forgiveness, only understanding. And for the first time, I saw her not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as a person who had made a terrible mistake and was now drowning in it. Before I left, she touched her stomach and said, "Do you want to feel him?" I hesitated, then placed my hand gently on the curve of her belly. A small kick pulsed against my palm. It was such a tiny thing, but it cracked something inside me open. I swallowed hard. "He's strong," I whispered. "Like his father," she said, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't correct her. From then on, I started showing up, slowly, cautiously. Doctor appointments, shopping trips, quiet evenings when we'd sit on the porch and talk about names. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, I was learning, are harder than endings. Each visit, Lila seemed lighter, and I, a little less haunted. One night, as I was leaving, she said, "I don't expect you to come back to me, but thank you for coming back to yourself." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Meanwhile, Gabe had gone silent. No one knew where he was. My mother said she saw him at church once, sitting in the back, eyes closed, hands clasped like a man bargaining with God. I didn't ask. I wasn't ready to face him yet. I thought about Sade sometimes too. I wondered if she was somewhere taking pictures of sunsets or strangers, if she'd already forgiven me for turning her heart into collateral damage. Once I almost called her. I even dialed the number. But when she answered, I froze and hung up. Some goodbyes are meant to remain echoes. Months passed. The day Lila went into labor was a Monday morning that smelled of rain. I rushed to the hospital, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When I got there, she was already in the delivery room, gripping the sheets, sweat glistening on her forehead. "You came," she said between contractions. "Of course I did," I said. She laughed weakly. "I didn't think you'd want to see me like this." I took her hand. "I've already seen the worst, Lila. This can only be better." She smiled through the pain. Hours later, the cry of a newborn filled the room. A boy, small, red, angry at existence in the way only newborns can be. The nurse wrapped him up and placed him in Lila's arms. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Do you want to hold him?" My hands trembled as I took him. He was so light, so impossibly delicate, and yet, in that tiny body, was the power to erase everything I thought I knew about pain. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was steady, sure. In that moment, I understood something my father used to say. Life will always find a reason to start over, even when you don't give it permission. We named him Tayo, which means joy. My mother said it was a perfect name for a child born out of sorrow. When she held him for the first time, she whispered, "Maybe this is how God gives us do-overs." And maybe she was right. Gabe came to the naming ceremony. I didn't know he would. When I saw him standing at the back, I felt my chest tighten. He looked nervous, like a man waiting to be sentenced. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the room. People were laughing, talking, eating, oblivious to the storm between us. Then, without really thinking, I walked toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached him, I said quietly, "You didn't have to come." He swallowed hard. "I did. He's my nephew." There was something sincere in his voice, something fragile. He looked down at the baby in my arms. "He's beautiful," he said softly. I nodded. "He is." For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it anyway." I looked at him, really looked. The man who once thought the world belonged to him now looked small, human, broken in a way that mirrored me. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can give yet," I said slowly, "but I'm tired of hating you." His eyes glistened. "That's more than I deserve." We stood there, two men bound by blood and ruin, trying to find our way back to something like family. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. There were no tears or embraces, just a quiet understanding that the war was over. In the months that followed, things began to settle. I focused on Tayo. Every cry, every laugh, every sleepless night felt like a lesson in starting over. Lila and I lived separately, but close. We became companions in parenthood, if not in love. Sometimes we'd have dinner together, talk about work, about how Tayo was growing too fast. It was peaceful in a way that didn't need explanation. One night, as I was leaving, she said, "Do you ever think about Sade?" I nodded. "Every day." She smiled gently. "Maybe one day you'll tell me what she meant to you." I smiled back. "Maybe one day I'll understand it myself." I started visiting Gabe, too. Slowly, cautiously. At first, we'd just sit outside my mother's house, talking about football, about work, about anything that wasn't the past. He'd sometimes bring small gifts for Tayo. A toy, a book, a smile that carried apology in every curve. My mother, watching us from the kitchen window, would sigh in relief. "My rivers are finally running side by side again," she said one day. And for the first time, I understood what she had meant all those years ago. But healing isn't a straight road. Some nights, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, replaying everything. Lila's voice, Gabe's face, Sade's touch. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, watching the shadows move, wondering if I'd ever really be free of it. Then Tayo would stir in his crib, make a small sound, and just like that, the darkness would shrink. Because he was here, because I was still standing, because somehow, life had found a way to keep going. A year later, I received a letter. No name on the envelope, just my address written in delicate handwriting. Inside was a photograph, two hands intertwined, one male, one female. No faces, no background, just hands. On the back, a single line. "We are all the sum of what we forgive." I knew immediately it was from Sade. I stared at it for a long time, then placed it in Tayo's memory box, among his hospital bracelet and his first tiny pair of socks. Because that photograph wasn't just hers, it was ours. A reminder of the lesson we had all paid for. One evening, months after that, Gabe showed up unannounced at my apartment. He looked different, healthier, grounded. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He sat on the couch looking around. "This place suits you," he said. "Quiet." I smiled faintly. Quiet can be dangerous if you're not ready for it. He nodded. "I've learned that." After a pause, he said, "I've been volunteering. with kids, teaching them photography. I raised an eyebrow. Photography?
He chuckled. Yeah, Sade taught me a few things before she left. Said maybe creating something would teach me how not to destroy everything else. His voice softened. She forgave me, you know. I looked down, then up at him. She forgave both of us. He nodded. Then maybe it's time we forgive ourselves, too. For the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine smile stretch across my face. That night after he left, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like a heartbeat. The air smelled of rain again, the same way it did the night everything fell apart. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt cleansing. I thought about all the versions of myself I had been: the brother, the husband, the avenger, the lost man, the father. And I realized that every one of those versions had led me here, to this quiet, imperfect peace. Now, sometimes when I hold Tayo and he grabs my finger with his tiny hand, I whisper stories to him. Stories about choices and consequences, about love and forgiveness. I tell him that his uncle once made a mistake so big it almost destroyed us, but that we found a way to rebuild. I tell him that his mother was brave enough to face her own guilt, and that bravery doesn't always look like heroism. It sometimes looks like showing up even when you're ashamed. And I tell him about a woman named Sade, who taught his father that healing isn't a reward, it's a responsibility. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is a fire that burns hot, then eats everything around it, including the person who lit it. Forgiveness, though, it's slow, quiet, boring even. It doesn't make headlines, but it builds something revenge never can. Peace. Real peace. The kind you can sleep in. Every now and then, when it rains and the roof starts to sing, I remember those childhood nights with Gabe. The two of us lying side by side, counting thunder, daring lightning to come closer. Back then, we believed nothing could break us. Maybe we were right. Maybe the breaking was just part of how we were supposed to bend. Because here we are, still brothers, still breathing, still trying. I don't know if I'll ever love Lila again the way I once did. I don't know if Sade will ever cross my path, or if I'd even be brave enough to face her if she did. But I do know this. The man who once lived on anger, now lives on grace. And that's enough. So if you're listening to this, wondering whether vengeance will heal your wound, believe me, it won't. It'll feed you at first, make you feel powerful. But when it's done, you'll find yourself starving for something you can't name. Choose differently. Choose to build, not burn. Because at the end of every war, there's always a child somewhere, waiting to learn what kind of world we've left behind. When I tuck Tayo in at night, I whisper one last thing to him before the light goes out. Son, never let pain turn you cruel. Let it teach you, let it shape you, but never let it own you. He doesn't understand yet, of course, but one day he will. And when he does, maybe he'll know that his father was once a man who tried to rewrite justice with anger and ended up finding redemption in forgiveness. And maybe that will be enough.